For the watch. For the watch. For the watch. For the watch. For the watch.
For the watch.
In fiction, there are plenty of characters who have been resurrected from the dead, whether it's physical or metaphorical. The resurrection is usually a key point in the journey of the hero to become a villain or make the character more wise. And it's a moment that the character can't really ever get over. And it makes sense. Most people in real life who have had a near-death experience or have come back from the dead, they always say it was the most important event to ever take place in their life, assuming that person didn't participate in the Fortnite World Cup. So it makes sense that if you are a writer and you want to write a resurrection, you should base it off of at least some parts of reality so it feels more real to the audience. And in Game of Thrones, there are plenty of deaths. So many deaths that make me want to take my anger out on my child. This show is known for having a lot of gruesome deaths. You don't need a reminder. But this show also has a resurrection. Beric Dondarrion gets resurrected a lot, and every time he comes back, he loses his memory and identity. The White Walkers are always just, resurrecting each other all the time, or at least the Night King is. It's kind of their version of fun. And at the end of season 7, the Night King literally resurrects a goddamn dragon. So the show not only has a lot of deaths, but it also has a lot of resurrections, like it's a, Game of Fortnite. But at the end of season 5, the very, very popular character Jon Snow dies after getting jumped.
Step off! Step out! Shit! They jumping me! They jumping me! Save your boy!
Jon Snow is dead. Now for the record, season 5 of Game of Thrones took a huge hit when it comes to quality. Characters started becoming shells of their former self, like my favorite Tyrion. Daenerys and Jaime didn't do much in season 5 overall, and it just started to make the show look like a complete mess. But Jon Snow was one of the few characters in season 5 that kept a lot of his momentum he had from the first 4 seasons. He may have not been great as the first 4 seasons Jon Snow, but he certainly didn't have nearly as terrible of a downfall as the other characters I just mentioned. But at the end of season 5, Jon Snow died. And now we gotta wait until season 6 to see what happened. Jon Snow's death was a lot more of a cliffhanger death than deaths like Ned Stark, Robb Stark, or Joffrey Baratheon, because Ned Stark died in episode 9 of season 1. So the very next week when episode 10 came out, we knew he was more dead than the Indian people in my basement. Robb Stark also dies in episode 9. So in episode 10, we knew he was also very, very dead. And Joffrey dies in episode 2 of season 4. And we basically got an entire season to confirm that little dweeb is actually dead. But Jon Snow's death was different. Jon Snow's death happened in the season finale of season 5, which means fans didn't see Jon Snow's head cut off his body and mounted on a spike. We didn't see Jon Snow's body given a burial. We didn't see his body burned like a lot of people do at the wall or beyond the wall. So there was definitely some gray area to this. There was a lot of question marks. But then on April 16th, 2016, Game of Thrones Season 6 premieres, and we hear that wonderful intro once again. Now I'm gonna be honest, not much happens here, but a few episodes into the season, with the power of friendship, Jon Snow gets revived. Let's go. Jon is back, which again was a breath of fresh air. Characters like Tyrion and Daenerys had already fallen off quite a bit at this point, so not having Jon Snow in the show would make things way more stale, but Jon is back. Like I said earlier, when a character gets revived, they usually have a very impactful change, usually for the worst. I mean, look at Darth Vader. Anakin gets burned alive and he symbolically dies, and after his symbolic death, he started to do some crazy, edgy Hitler stuff. And Darth Vader made sure the world knew that Anakin was gone.
Anakin's gone. I'm what remains.
So let's see how Jon Snow changes after his literal resurrection.
They think you're some kind of god. The man who returned from the dead.
I'm not a god. I know that.
I saw your pecker. What kind of god would have a pecker that small?
Alright, that was a little weird. Jon has basically the exact same reaction to being called a god that he would had before his resurrection. But let's continue watching, maybe that was like a little hiccup for the writers.
This is good soup. Do you remember those kidney pies old Nan used to make?
With the peas and onions. We never should have left Winterfell.
Don't you wish we could go back to the day we left? I want to scream at myself, don't go, you idiot.
How could we know?
I spent a lot of time thinking about what an ass I was to you. I wish I could change everything.
We were children.
I was awful, just admit it.
You were occasionally awful. I'm sure I can't have been great fun always sulking in the corner while the rest of you played.
Can you forgive me?
There's nothing to forgive.
Forgive me.
All right, I forgive you.
Alright, what the hell is going on here? Why is Jon treating death like it's another day at the office? I mean, literally, the rest of the season, his death is hardly ever mentioned again. Jon does execute the people who betrayed him, which was a really cool scene. But after that, they basically treated his death like it was some small hiccup in the Jon Snow story. Like, the reaction Jon had to his own death and resurrection is less than the reaction my friend had when his Fortnite account got deleted. This isn't normal whatsoever. Jon Snow had less of a reaction to his own death than hockey players do to losing in the playoffs. Jon just goes back to being Jon in season 6. Now, luckily for Jon, season 6 did bring two of the most popular TV episodes of all time. Season 6, episode 9, The Battle of the Bastards, sits at a 9.9 out of 10 on IMDb. And the very next episode, The Winds of Winter, rest in peace, we are never getting that book, also sits at a 9.9 out of 10, putting both in that GOAT category of TV episodes. And Jon plays a huge role in both of those episodes. Let's talk about the first one, because it was a huge missed opportunity for Jon Snow's death to actually mean something. Now, this battle was insane to film. It took 25 days to film this battle. 80 real horses were used for this battle. It took 10 hours to film the scene where Jon punched Ramsay Bolton like he's a drunk dad taking his anger out on his child. And according to the actors, those punches were real, by the way.
Jon Snow beats the shit out of your character. It was incredibly satisfying to watch for some of us. And I heard that Kit didn't hold back. He really hit you.
Yeah, I mean, he caught me a couple of times. Once on the chin with a shield, which was the worst one. But, like, I just said to him, go for it, mate. And if you wanted to look as good as possible, you've got to go for it. And if you don't get punched a couple of times, then you're not doing it properly. And I was kind of, so, you got to do it.
So yeah, there are a lot of cool behind the scenes stuff for this battle that I might do a video on. So, make sure to like and subscribe and all of that. But like I said, when a character dies and gets resurrected, the change is usually dark. They care less for other people and only really care about their own motives. And in this battle, Ramsay the Merciful brings out Jon Snow's half-brother Rodney. No, that's not his name. Fucking Rodrigo. No, Rickon. There it is. Rickon is alive and Jon Snow goes to save him and Rickon dies and the battle starts. But in my opinion, what should have happened, because Jon Snow got resurrected, Jon should have not shown as much care for Rickon because Jon doesn't want to risk death again. Jon should have taken a Tywin Lannister approach to this battle, or even a Ramsay Bolton approach to this battle, where he wants to just essentially make sure he survives this battle because he doesn't want to die again. He already died. He doesn't want to go into a battle and increase his chance of dying so quickly after his resurrection. And because Jon is playing such a defensive position, Rickon still dies. And the blood is on Jon's hands. This makes a lot more sense because in season 7, Arya and Sansa have their weird like little conflict because Sansa is like slightly jealous of Jon being king in the north. Trust me, I know the plotline was ass. But this conflict would have been a lot better and make a lot more sense because Sansa knows Jon could have saved Rickon if we go with what I wanted. But Jon is so fragile and so cold-hearted that he would just let his brother die then experience his own death again. And Sansa could have actual question marks if Jon deserves to be the king. Or, here's another way of looking at it, you could make Jon more reckless and more ambitious to save Rickon, which also leads to Rickon's death. This is a theory from the Game of Thrones YouTuber AllShiftX. He said this in his real Jon Snow video, so I'll play a little bit of that video so you get more of an idea what I'm trying to go with the whole like he's more reckless and like slightly evil thing after his death and could lead to Rickon's death.
Ramsay will tell Jon not to attack or else he'll kill Rickon. But since Jon is now more reckless and because he wants Winterfell, Jon attacks anyway and causes Rickon's death. This would show that Jon has changed, that he's willing to risk innocent lives to get what he wants. And this could also create conflict between Jon and Sansa, who might blame Jon for Rickon's death. Jon could finally reclaim the home of the Starks, but at the cost of alienating his Stark siblings, losing the very family he always wanted. This is just speculation, but Jon's battles in the Winds of Winter will explore what kind of person he's become after his resurrection. What will Jon sacrifice to take Winterfell?
Yeah, that would have been a lot cooler. But instead, Jon Snow just beats up Ramsay. And it's a very good guy hero versus bad guy villain thing. There's no gray area here. And Jon being revived doesn't really add much to the battle, or at least character-wise. Jon did have the whole Night's Watch thing, where because he died, he completed his oath for the Night's Watch, which means this battle could take place. But overall, Jon Snow's resurrection didn't do much here. Or even in the next episode. The next episode, Jon becomes king in the North, and his true identity comes out. I already made a video on this, so check out that video after this video if you want. But overall, in season 6, Jon Snow's most important moment in the entire series just didn't mean anything. He basically just swept it under the rug. Like it's one of those things where like his DoorDash driver brought him the food a bit cold and he just says, yeah, whatever, moved on, I'm rich. That's how everything feels like. It just feels like so off, which is sad because the actor who plays Jon Snow had basically gone into hiding after season 5. After Jon died, the actor Kit Harington basically could not be seen anywhere near Game of Thrones, so it would, spoil the return. The actor even got pulled over by the police and the officer let him go because he told the truth about Jon being revived next season.
Follow me back to the police station, or you can tell me whether you live in the next series of Game. And I laughed, like you're all laughing. I looked at him and went, I'm alive next season. And he goes, on your way, Lord Commander.
Then you have season 7. Season 7 is, season 7. It's a season that is very like MCU-like and not very, Game of Thrones-like. Whether it's the pace or the amount of episodes or teleportation or, whatever. The writers of Game of Thrones, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, wanted Game of Thrones to only go 7 seasons. So that's one of the reasons why the characters just started flying over to their destination. Almost like they're fast traveling in an Assassin's Creed game. But Jon is king of the North. He meets Daenerys. He goes beyond the wall. He becomes the luckiest person in the world, wink wink. But notice how I didn't mention anything about Jon's death because this season didn't do anything with his death. Actually, I take that back. His death actually added a lot to Sir Davos' speech that really made Jon just feel hype.
He is the first to make allies of wildlings and Northmen. He was named Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. He was named King in the North. Not because of his birthright. He has no birthright. He's a damn bastard. All those hard sons of bitches chose him as their leader because they believe in him. All those things you don't believe in, he faced those things. He fought those things for the good of his people. He risked his life for his people. He took a knife in the heart for his people. He gave his own...
But I actually lied to you. Season 7 had the most impactful scene related to Jon Snow's death. And that was Daenerys just looking at his scars. Maybe his abs, I don't know. But either way, this is the best scene we got from his death, which is just embarrassing. Like, you remember when Ned Stark died? The entire North rose up for his legacy. You remember when Joffrey died? We had an entire season that sent Tyrion to prison, Oberyn to his death, Tywin to his death. Well, for Jon Snow stabbing, his peak after his death, that was a direct consequence of his stabbing. It was just Daenerys looking at his body and was like, damn, he actually did resurrect, that's kind of cool. That's the closing act of his plot twist. Like, at this point, why don't you just grab my balls and just twist them, man? Because you're doing worse to me with this. And the saddest part about this is the show writers, they wouldn't even have been allowed to make the show if it wasn't for Jon Snow. When the show writers went to the author George Martin, they asked George if they could adapt the Game of Thrones books into the TV show, and George said he will only allow them to make the show if they answered this question right about Jon Snow, because George wanted to see how well they actually understood the character of Jon Snow and how much they've been paying attention to the story.
And George, you guys obviously hit it off.
We took him out for lunch here in LA at the Palm, and we had a 4-hour lunch. And at the very end of lunch, he was sitting there kind of looking between the two of us, and he said, "Who was Jon Snow's mother?"
Oh.
And it was a test question. And I'll always remember this. And George had a little bit of butter in his beard. And I'll always, like, it's just one of those images that gets, stamped in your brain.
We'd invested so much of ourselves and so much hope in this. And it was that feeling, like, if you mess this up, it's all going to go away.
Who fielded that question?
We had weirdly, we had both talked about it because we'd read the book again by that point. And when you read it a second time, and if you're paying attention, it's you can kind of tell who Jon Snow's mother is.
I see.
Yeah. So we had an answer that we thought was right, and turned out, not to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, but it turned out to be the right answer.
Okay, so we know from the show that's the same mother from the book that was in the show.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So George assumed, hey, they guessed Jon Snow's parents correct, which means they probably understand his character and not mess up something big as Jon's resurrection. But just like the people who voted for Justin Trudeau, they were wrong. So yeah, we went through 2 full seasons without really mentioning Jon Snow's revival or at least any real impact on him. But then we got season 8 of Game of Thrones, and you know how this goes.
Just to get back to that wall.
So yeah, you know the story. Season 8 of Game of Thrones is a masterpiece. It's something we don't deserve, but God felt very kind and decided to bless the world with the final season of Game of Thrones. You know the story. Don't really think we need a full retrospective. Let's talk about Jon Snow in Season 8. Well, Episode 1, Jon Snow learns his parentage, which in my opinion, it is one of the best scenes of Season 8. I actually thought it was really cool how Jon is standing in front of the statue of Ned Stark, and he's learning his true identity in front of Ned Stark. It makes sense because Ned promised Jon the next time they see each other, he will tell Jon the truth about his mother. So, that was really cool. And the dialogue in the scene with Sam and Jon is honestly underrated. You can really tell that the writers knew the dialogue for this scene for many years because it really felt like early Game of Thrones dialogue, but with the super fast pace of the later season dialogue.
Your mother was Lyanna Stark. And your father, your real father, was Rhaegar Targaryen. You've never been a bastard. You are Aegon Targaryen, true heir to the Iron Throne.
My father was the most honorable man I ever met. You said he lied to me all my life.
Your father, Ned Stark, he promised your mother he'd always protect you. And he did. Robert would have murdered you if he knew. You're the true king. Aegon Targaryen, 6th of his name, protector of the realm, all of it.
But as good as that dialogue is, not really anything about Jon's death. Then episode 2 starts, and nothing. Nothing at all. Then episode 3 starts. There was the long night where Jon yells at a dragon. Episode 4, Jon didn't do much. Episode 5, Jon fights for the Battle of King's Landing, and then you have the finale. Jon does have a decent dialogue scene with Tyrion, but you could tell that the writers also had this scene in their head for a couple of years because it's the first time Tyrion said anything important for the last 3 seasons.
Love is more powerful than reason. We all know that. Look at my brother.
Love is the death of duty.
You just came up with that.
Maester Aemon said it a long time ago.
Sometimes duty is the death of love. You are the shield that guards the realms of men. You've always tried to do the right thing, no matter the cost. You've tried to protect people. Who is the greatest threat to the people now? It's a terrible thing I'm asking. It's also the right thing. Do you think I'm the last man shall execute? Who is more dangerous than the rightful heir to the Iron Throne?
But Jon kills Dany because she butchered a city and her good looks couldn't save her this time and give her a pass this time. And Jon goes back to the place where he got stabbed to death. And the show is over. Yep, the show is over. Just like that. Jon's death essentially meant nothing. He went from being the plot twist that had the most amount of question marks to now people just looking back and be like, oh yeah, I remember that happened. I remember Jon Snow died. Like, the hype is just all gone. They didn't execute on his death whatsoever. You know, death? The thing that if someone has a near-death experience, it changes their entire outlook on life. Real life people have changed for the better after their near-death experience. Some of the best characters in fiction have changed for the worst because of the way they experience death. They don't just crawl back to the good side. Well, in Game of Thrones, or at least the late season of Game of Thrones, death is kind of just like, you know, dropping a glass on your foot and nothing more. And it sucks because of how cool the plot twist was back in season 5.
For the watch. For the watch. For the watch. For the watch. For the watch.
That scene just doesn't hit nearly as much as I hit my kid when I'm drunk, and nearly as much as when we first watched it. Like, seriously, that scene was supposed to be up there with Ned Stark's execution or the Purple Wedding. If you go to a Game of Thrones fan, they'll all see how great Joffrey's death was, and Ned Stark's death was, Robb Stark's death was. But with Jon, they'll say, yeah, the first time I watched it, it was amazing, but after 10 years having flown by, I just kind of stopped thinking about Jon's death as much as the others. And you can't blame them. His death was a nothing burger at the end. Nothing really came out of it. There was no self-hatred, no villain arc, no outburst, not really that much trust issues either. We had a few, but that was kind of it. The only scene after his death that actually made any sense was this one.
We saw what's out there. We know it's coming here. How can you leave us now?
I did everything I could, you know.
You swore a vow.
Aye, I pledged my life to the Night's Watch. I gave my life.
For all knights to come.
They killed me, Ed, my own brothers. You want me to stay here after that?
His death literally meant nothing when it could have meant everything. Now, if you're someone who hasn't read the books, in the books, when one of the Starks die, like Robb Stark, his spirit and his soul lives on with his direwolf. And Robb Stark's direwolf died immediately after Robb died, so, you know, not really the best night at the phrase Robb had that night. But yeah, Jon in the books will probably live on with his direwolf for a little bit. And they could have added that to the show. And when Jon gets revived, they should have made him evil, and even made him look a little evil. Jon should have had white hair when he got revived, because a few characters who died in the books, they return with white hair. Like Catelyn Stark returns with white hair, and when Theon metaphorically dies in the books, he also returns with white hair. That will literally make Jon look like his direwolf ghost and make him look so much more like a Targaryen. And not to mention the consequences of his death. The YouTuber Allswift has talked about the physical consequence of death in the Game of Thrones books, and tell me this doesn't sound so cool to view on screen and see Jon struggling with this on screen.
There are perks to being undead. Beric and Coltans and Melisandre don't need to eat or sleep. It could be useful for Jon to not have to eat or sleep if he has to fight a war or travel the frozen north, but there are downsides to being undead. Beric loses memories, Stoneheart can hardly speak. They look like ugly, scary zombies, they're wounded and rotted, their hearts don't beat. Will Jon become a hideous zombie? If his heart doesn't beat, will his penis still work? That could be disappointing for Daenerys.
Imagine how cool it would have been if we got a scene where Jon is not eating and Sansa is worried for him and Jon is making other people scared around him. Or a scene where Jon is scared to talk to Daenerys because, like me and many other Fortnite players, he's got erectile dysfunction. But for him it was because of his death. These are things that should have been obvious to add. And these are just the bare minimum. Imagine a villain arc of Jon Snow. Imagine Jon realized that the wildlings are right and Jon is now trying to genocide the Night's Watch. That would be the biggest get back moment of all time. Or imagine Jon is just throwing random outbursts at Sam, showing he doesn't really care about helping others beneath him anymore. Or imagine a scene where Jon threatens to kill Sansa if she ever even thinks about betraying him and to be Queen of the North. I know this sounds a little weird, but if you do research on how author George Martin writes death, he writes it like this. He explained it many times how to write death and resurrection, what makes resurrections actually work, and this is how it's most likely going to happen in the future books, like George Martin has said.
I do think that if you're bringing a character back, that if a character has gone through death, that's a transformative experience. Even back in those days of Wonder Man and all that, I love the fact that he died. I don't think I was, although I liked the character in later years, I wasn't so thrilled when he came back, because that sort of undid the power of it. And much as I admire Tolkien, I've once again always felt that Gandalf should have stayed dead. I mean, that was such an incredible sequence in Fellowship of the Ring when he faces the Balrog on the bridge of Khazad-dûm and he falls into the gulf, and his last words are "Fly, you fools." And what power that had, how that grabbed me. And then he comes back as Gandalf the White, and if anything, he's like sort of improved. But I never liked Gandalf the White as much as Gandalf the Grey, and I never liked him coming back. I think it would have been a even stronger story if Tolkien had left him dead. My characters who come back from death are the worse for wear. In some ways, they're not even the same characters anymore. The body may be moving, but some aspect of the spirit is changed or transformed, and they've lost something. One of the characters who has come back repeatedly from death is a minor character named Beric Dondarrion, the Lightning Lord, and each time he's revived, he loses a little more of himself. And he was sent on a mission before his first death. He was sent on a mission to do something, and it's like that's what he's clinging to. And he's forgetting other things. He's forgetting who he is or where he lived. He's forgotten the woman that he was once supposed to marry. Bits of his humanity are lost every time he comes back from death, but he remembers that mission. It's like his flesh is falling away from him, but this one thing, this purpose that he had, is part of what's animating him and bringing him back to death. And I think you see echoes of that with some of the other characters who have come back from death.
Yeah, Jon being really young literally means he has the most likely chance to become the villain, or at least a lot more than the older people like Catelyn Stark. And Jon Snow's revival could have had something to do with the Azor Ahai prophecy. The name Jon does mean gift from God, according to, ChatGPT, which makes sense because, ChatGPT is also a gift from God. It helped me win many arguments. But yeah, it should have had something to do with the prophecy. I mean, like even Ulshrift X pointed out, Jon Snow's death in Game of Thrones is very similar to the death of Jesus in the Bible.
It's all very biblical. A man of kinda mysterious birth goes around saying some sensible things about loving thy neighbor, like making peace with the wildlings, but he gets betrayed and killed by his friends before a cross. Like, don't tell me that's not a cross. And he stays dead for a bit, but then is reborn as a divine hero. So, yeah, in conclusion, Jon Snow is Game of Thrones Jesus.
And it would have made so much sense that Jon sacrifices himself in the Long Night to kill the Night King, because Jon is afraid to die again. He wants to live a long life now. That's the only thing he wants, a long, happy life. But instead, in order to save the world, he sacrificed himself to kill the Night King, and he dies very, very young. That would have been so much better than this. But the last reason why Jon Snow's death was so ass was the pace. In order for Jon Snow's death to be more impactful, you need more than 20 episodes. But the writers didn't listen to the author, especially when the author literally knew this. The author, George, literally begged them to make Game of Thrones 10 to 13 seasons. They said, nah, I'm gonna do my own thing.
Why is it ending?
I don't know. Ask David and Dan when they come through. We could have gone to 11, 12, 13 seasons, but I guess they wanted a life.
So you wanted it to keep going.
Well, you know, if you've read my novels, you know there was enough material for more seasons. They made certain cuts, but that's fine. We have 5 other shows, 5 prequels in development that are based on other periods in the history of Westeros. Some of them just 100 years before Game of Thrones, some of them 5,000 years before Game of Thrones.
Now, did you know Game of Thrones would be ending with this season, or did they call you and say, hey, let's have a chat?
David and Dan have been saying for, like 5 years that 7 seasons was all they would go. And we got them to go to 8, but not any more than that. So, I had to custom that. There was a period like 5 years ago where they were saying 7 seasons and I was saying 10 seasons. And, they won. They're the ones actually working on it.
Yeah, these dudes thought they were smarter than George.
Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet and Euron's forces.
We need to find Euron Greyjoy's fleet and sink it.
Your Grace, he's already destroyed a good portion of our fleet.
While Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet and Euron's forces.
But man, what a moment this was when you first got to watch Jon die. It truly felt like, yeah, Game of Thrones is the best show of all time, despite season 5 being kind of mid. And then afterwards, the moment meant nothing. Just like 99% of the Game of Thrones TV show after season 5, when Jon Snow died, he may have been revived on screen, but to me, when Jon died, a little part of me died as well. And the only thing that can fill that void is the goddamn Winds of Winter book. Please release that thing, George. But yeah, that's it for this video. Like, subscribe, and peace.